The howling winter wind nearly toppled Katherine Nichols as she stumbled up the hill toward the only light visible for miles. Blood dripped from a gash on her forehead, mingling with tears and melting snow as she clutched her thin shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. Everything she owned had been stolen when the stagecoach was ambushed, everything except the locket containing her parents' portraits and the wedding ring of her now deceased husband. Montana Territory, in 1879, was unforgiving to a widow with nothing to her name but grief and determination. The lantern light grew brighter as Katherine approached the modest ranch house. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth that her frozen body desperately craved. She hesitated before knocking, pride warring with necessity. 3 days without proper food or shelter had weakened her resolve. Katherine raised a trembling fist and rapped on the weathered door, praying whoever answered wouldn't turn away a desperate woman on this bitter December night. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders and piercing blue eyes that widened at the sight of her bloodied face. A neatly trimmed beard covered his strong jawline, and a revolver rested casually at his hip. "Good Lord, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice deep and graveled from years of hard living. "The stagecoach, robbers," Katherine managed before her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. The man lifted her with surprising gentleness and carried her to a chair near the crackling fire. The sudden warmth made her gasp, bringing new tears to her eyes. "Name's Wyatt Vaughn," he said, retrieving a cloth and dipping it into a basin of water. "This is gonna sting." Katherine winced as he cleaned the wound on her forehead. "Katherine Nichols," she whispered. "I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Vaughn. No trouble." His movements were efficient but careful. "You're lucky you found my place. Not much else around for 20 miles. When he finished tending her wound, he disappeared into another room, returning with a steaming mug that smelled of chicory coffee laced with something stronger. "Drink this. It'll warm you from inside." Katherine accepted the mug gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers before taking a sip. The whiskey burned pleasantly down her throat. "Thank you," she said, finding her voice. I can work to repay your kindness. I'm good with cooking, sewing, anything you need. I just need shelter until I can make my way to Helena. My cousin lives there." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he shook his head. "Work no more, my home is yours now." "At least until you're strong enough to travel." Katherine stared at him, uncomprehending. "Sir, I couldn't possibly, it's just Wyatt," he interrupted. "And I wasn't asking. You're in no condition to do anything but rest." A woman alone in a stranger's home would normally fear for her virtue, but something in Wyatt's eyes, a sadness that mirrored her own, told Katherine she was safe here. "One night," she relented. "Then I'll help with chores tomorrow." Wyatt's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "We'll see." He showed her to a small bedroom with a narrow bed covered in handmade quilts. It was spare but clean, with a small window that would let in the morning light. "This was my sister's room," he explained. "She's been gone 3 years now, consumption." "I'm sorry," Katherine said sincerely. Wyatt nodded, his face once again unreadable. "There's a nightgown in the trunk. It should fit well enough. Get some rest, Katherine." After he left, Katherine changed into the simple cotton nightgown and crawled under the thick quilts. Despite the strangeness of her situation, exhaustion pulled her quickly into a dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and bacon. Katherine dressed hurriedly in her own clothes, now dried by the fire. She smoothed her auburn hair as best she could without a proper brush and ventured into the main room. Wyatt stood at the iron stove, his back to her. The cabin looked different in daylight, modest but well-maintained, with simple furnishings and a few books stacked neatly on a small shelf. "Good morning," she said. He turned, spatula in hand. "Mornin'. How's your head?" Katherine touched the bandage gingerly. "Better, thank you." "Please let me finish cooking. It's the least I can do." Wyatt regarded her for a moment before handing over the spatula. "If you insist." As Katherine took over breakfast preparations, she noticed Wyatt watching her with curious eyes. She wondered what he saw, a bedraggled widow desperate for help or something more. "You mentioned robbers," he said as they sat down to eat. "Did they take everything?" Katherine nodded, fighting back fresh tears. "My husband died 6 months ago, typhoid. I sold our small farm in Kansas to start anew with my cousin in Helena. Everything I had was in my trunk: clothes, money, even my wedding photo." She touched the locket at her neck. "This and my wedding ring are all I have left." "The Blackwater gang," Wyatt said grimly. "They've been terrorizing the stagecoach routes for months now. Sheriff Daniels is too drunk most days to do much about it." "I should be grateful they only took my possessions," Katherine said softly. Wyatt's eyes darkened. "Yes, you should." After breakfast, despite Wyatt's protests, Katherine insisted on washing the dishes. As she worked, she gazed out the window at the ranch spread before her. A barn stood about 50 yards from the house, and beyond it stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks snow-covered and majestic. "It's beautiful here," she commented when Wyatt returned from tending to his horses. "It's peaceful," he agreed. "My pa staked this claim 20 years ago, been adding to it ever since he passed. You're here alone." "Just me and the ranch hands, 4 of them. They bunk in the bunkhouse beyond the barn. Good men." Katherine dried her hands on a towel. "Mr. Vaughn, Wyatt, I appreciate your kindness, but I must insist on earning my keep while I'm here. I'm stronger than I look." Wyatt leaned against the doorframe, considering her words. "Winter's setting in hard. Trail to Helena will be impassable soon if it isn't already. You might be here longer than you planned." The thought sent a chill through Katherine that had nothing to do with the cold. "All the more reason I should work. I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Wyatt said firmly, "but if it makes you feel better, you can help with cooking and such. Maria, my housekeeper, only comes 3 times a week, and the boys would appreciate a woman's touch with the meals." Katherine nodded, relieved. "Thank you." Over the next few days, Katherine settled into a routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast for Wyatt and his ranch hands Tom, an older man with a grizzled beard and kind eyes. Brothers Jake and Matthew, both in their 20s with matching ginger hair. And Louis, a young Mexican cowboy with a talent for breaking wild horses. The men treated her with respect, tipping their hats and thanking her for the meals. They brought news from town when they went for supplies and shared stories around the dinner table that made her laugh for the first time since her husband died. Wyatt remained more reserved, but Katherine often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster, though she tried to ignore it. She was still in mourning, after all, and he was simply a kind man helping a woman in need. A week after her arrival, Katherine was kneading bread dough when Wyatt entered the kitchen, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "Got something for you," he said, placing it on the table. Katherine wiped flour from her hands. "What is this? Open it and see." Inside was a simple blue dress, a nightgown, undergarments, and a hairbrush. Katherine looked up at him, speechless. "Figured you needed more than one dress," Wyatt explained, a slight flush creeping up his neck. "Had Mrs. Porter at the general store help with the sizing." "I can't accept this," Katherine said, though her fingers caressed the soft fabric longingly. "You can and you will," Wyatt insisted. "Consider it an early Christmas gift." Katherine hadn't even realized Christmas was approaching. The thought brought fresh pain. Her first Christmas without James, spent among strangers. "Thank you," she said finally, blinking back tears. "I'll repay you somehow." "Didn't ask for repayment," Wyatt said, his voice gruff. He turned to leave, then paused. "There's a storm coming." "Big one, according to Louis. His knee always acts up before a blizzard." "I'll make extra bread," Katherine replied, returning to her dough. The blizzard arrived that night with a vengeance. Wind howled around the cabin's eaves and snow piled against the windows. Katherine sat by the fire, mending one of Wyatt's shirts while he cleaned his rifle at the table. "Will the cattle be safe?" she asked, concerned about the animals she'd grown fond of during her short time at the ranch. "They'll huddle together in the draws," Wyatt answered. "Cattle are smarter than people give them credit for. The hands will check on them when the storm breaks." The wind gave a particularly violent gust, rattling the windows. Katherine jumped, pricking her finger with the needle. Wyatt noticed and set aside his rifle. "Let me see." Before she could protest, he had crossed the room and taken her hand in his calloused one. The tiny drop of blood seemed insignificant, but Wyatt treated it with the same care he had shown her forehead wound, retrieving a clean cloth and pressing it gently to her fingertip. "You've been through worse than a needle prick," he said, his voice low. "We all have," Katherine replied, suddenly aware of how close he was, of the warmth of his hand around hers. Wyatt released her hand and returned to his rifle. "Tell me about your husband." The question startled her. "James was a good man, kind. We married young. I was 18, he was 22. We had a small farm in Kansas, nothing fancy, but it was ours." She smiled at the memory. "He loved books, would read to me in the evenings, everything from Dickens to penny dreadfuls." "Children?" Wyatt asked, not looking up from his work. Katherine's smile faltered. "We tried for 5 years, but it wasn't meant to be." Wyatt nodded, understanding in his silence. "What about you?" Katherine ventured. "Have you ever been married?" "No," the answer came quickly, definitively. "Came close once. Sarah was her name. She couldn't handle ranch life, left for St. Louis with a traveling salesman." "I'm sorry," Wyatt shrugged. "It was for the best. She would have been miserable here." "Not everyone finds beauty in this wilderness," Katherine observed, looking out the window at the swirling snow. "I do, though. There's something honest about it." Wyatt glanced up, surprise evident in his eyes. "Most women want civilization, theaters and tea parties." Katherine laughed softly. "I've never been to a theater in my life, and the only tea parties I've attended were with my rag doll when I was a child." A small smile tugged at Wyatt's lips. "You're an unusual woman, Katherine Nichols." "Is that good or bad?" "Good," he said firmly. "Definitely good." The blizzard lasted 3 days. Confined to the cabin, Katherine and Wyatt learned more about each other than either had intended to reveal. She told him about growing up as the daughter of a blacksmith in a small Missouri town, about meeting James at a harvest dance, about the lonely months after his death. Wyatt shared stories of his father, a former Confederate soldier who had come west to escape the ravages of war, and of his mother, who had taught him to read by lantern light after long days of ranch work. He spoke of his sister, Emma, whose illness had prompted him to ride through another blizzard for a doctor, only to return and find her already gone. On the 3rd night, as they sat before the fire sharing a bottle of whiskey, Katherine realized she had not thought of James all day. The revelation brought both guilt and a strange sense of liberation. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, noticing her pensive expression. "Life," Katherine replied. "How unpredictable it is. A month ago, I never could have imagined sitting here with you. Regrets." His tone was light, but his eyes watched her carefully. Katherine considered the question. "No, confusion, perhaps, but not regret." Wyatt refilled her glass. "Fair enough." The next morning dawned clear and blindingly bright. The snow had transformed the ranch into a pristine wonderland. Katherine stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching as Wyatt and his men dug paths to the barn and corrals. Lewis was the first to reach the cattle. He returned with news that they had weathered the storm well, though one calf had been born during the blizzard and needed special attention. "Bring it to the barn," Wyatt instructed. "Katherine, would you mind helping? You've got gentler hands than any of us." Katherine eagerly followed Lewis to where the newborn calf lay shivering beside its mother. The tiny creature, black with a white star on its forehead, could barely stand. "Poor thing," Katherine murmured, kneeling beside it. "Born into a blizzard, but it survived," Wyatt pointed out, joining them. "That says something about its spirit." Together, they moved mother and calf to a sheltered stall in the barn. Katherine bottle-fed the calf while Wyatt watched, an unreadable expression on his face. "What will you name it?" he asked. Katherine looked up in surprise. Me, I couldn't, you saved it. Naming rights are yours. She studied the wobbly creature, now sucking greedily at the bottle. Hope, she decided. Her name is Hope. Wyatt nodded his approval. Hope it is. As December progressed, Katherine found herself less eager to leave for Helena. She wrote to her cousin, explaining her situation and promising to visit in the spring. The reply came a week later. Her cousin welcomed her whenever she could make the journey safely. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolation of the ranch. Katherine baked cookies and pies, decorated the cabin with pine boughs, and even convinced Wyatt to help her cut a small tree to place in the corner of the main room. "Haven't had a Christmas tree since Emma died," he admitted as they strung popcorn garlands one evening. "Then it's high time," Katherine replied. "Christmas is for remembering those we've lost, but also for celebrating life." On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands joined them for dinner. Katherine had prepared a feast: roast beef, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The men had chipped in to buy her a gift, a woolen shawl in deep green that complemented her auburn hair. "It's beautiful," she exclaimed, wrapping it around her shoulders immediately. "Prettier than the feed sacks we usually get from the boss," Jake joked, earning a playful cuff from Wyatt. After dinner, Tom produced a fiddle and played cheerful tunes while Matthew accompanied him on harmonica. Louis taught Katherine a simple Mexican dance, much to the amusement of the others. When the hands retired to their quarters, Katherine and Wyatt remained by the fire, the tree glowing with candles in the corner. "I have something for you," Wyatt said, retrieving a small package from his bedroom. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal with blank pages and a fountain pen. "You mentioned you used to keep a diary," Wyatt explained. "Thought you might want to start again." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Katherine impulsively leaned forward and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, it's perfect." Wyatt's eyes widened at the contact, but he didn't pull away. "Merry Christmas, Katherine." "I have something for you too," she said, suddenly shy. She handed him a crudely wrapped package. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf made from wool she had saved from mending projects. "It's not much," she began, but Wyatt wrapped it around his neck immediately. "It's exactly what I needed," he assured her. "No one's made me something by hand since my mother died." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, adding to the peaceful atmosphere. "Katherine," Wyatt said finally, his voice unusually hesitant. "I know you plan to leave for Helena when the weather breaks, but—" He paused, searching for words. "I'd like you to consider staying, permanently." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. "Staying, as what?" Wyatt met her gaze directly. "As whatever you want to be, housekeeper, if that's all you're comfortable with, but I hope you might consider more in time." "More," Katherine whispered. "I've grown fond of you," Wyatt admitted. "More than fond. I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I respect your grief. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like the chance to court you properly." Katherine stared at him, stunned by the confession. "Wyatt, don't answer now," he interrupted gently. "Just promise you'll think about it before you leave." Katherine nodded, unable to voice the conflicting emotions swirling within her. "I promise." January brought clearer weather but deeper cold. Katherine continued her duties around the ranch, now including caring for Hope, who had grown stronger each day. The calf followed her around the barn like a puppy, much to everyone's amusement. Katherine used her new journal to sort through her feelings about Wyatt's Christmas Eve proposition. She had come to care deeply for him, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. But was it too soon? Would loving another man dishonor James's memory? Wyatt kept his word, not pressing her for an answer. But she noticed small changes in his behavior. He brought her wildflowers preserved under the snow, sat closer to her by the fire in the evenings, found reasons to touch her hand when passing dishes at dinner. In late January, a rider approached the ranch, bearing news that chilled Katherine to the bone. The Blackwater gang had been captured after a shootout in a town 50 miles east. Among the items recovered were personal effects stolen from stagecoach passengers, including a leather trunk with the initials KN. "It's at the sheriff's office in Willow Creek," the rider, a deputy named Hobbs, informed them. "Sheriff asked me to ride out and let you know, madam, since he heard you were staying here." "Thank you," Katherine said, her mind racing. "When can I claim it?" "Anytime you like. Road's clear enough for travel now." Wyatt, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "I'll take you tomorrow if you'd like." Katherine nodded gratefully. "Yes, please." That night she could barely sleep, knowing that tomorrow she would reclaim her possessions and with them, the ability to continue to Helena as originally planned. The thought brought less joy than she had expected. The journey to Willow Creek took most of the morning. Wyatt drove the wagon with Katherine beside him, bundled in blankets against the cold. They spoke little, both lost in their own thoughts. Willow Creek proved to be a small but growing town with a main street lined with businesses, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and at the end, the sheriff's office. Wyatt helped Katherine down from the wagon and escorted her inside. Sheriff Daniels, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Nichols, I presume, your trunk's right here." He gestured to a familiar leather case sitting in the corner. "Everything should be intact except the money, I'm afraid." "Those bastards, pardon my language, madam, spent most of it before we caught up with them." Katherine knelt beside the trunk, running her fingers over the brass fittings. "May I?" At the sheriff's nod, she opened it to find her clothes neatly folded, her books stacked along one side, and at the bottom, wrapped in a shawl, the framed photograph of her wedding day. She lifted it reverently, tears welling in her eyes as she gazed at James's smiling face. "Found something else that might interest you, Mr. Vaughn," Sheriff Daniels said, drawing Wyatt aside. Katherine half listened to their conversation as she inventoried her belongings. "Cattle rustling," Wyatt was saying. "How many head?" 20, at least, from the Carson place." "Got reason to believe they might hit yours next. They're getting desperate with winter dragging on." Wyatt nodded grimly. "I appreciate the warning." After arranging to have the trunk loaded onto their wagon, they stopped at the general store for supplies. Katherine used a small amount of money the sheriff had recovered to purchase thread and fabric, determined to make new curtains for Wyatt's cabin to show her gratitude. As they prepared to leave town, a woman called out to Katherine from the boardwalk. "Mrs. Nichols, is that you?" Katherine turned to see a well-dressed woman hurrying toward them. It took a moment to recognize Harriet Porter, the storekeeper's wife who had helped select the blue dress Katherine now wore. "Mrs. Porter, hello," Katherine greeted her. "I'm so glad to see you looking well, Mrs." Porter said, her eyes darting curiously between Katherine and Wyatt. "We were all so worried when we heard about the stagecoach robbery. Are you staying at the Vaughn Ranch still?" "Yes, for now," Katherine replied, conscious of Wyatt standing silently beside her. "How lovely, Mrs." Porter said, though her tone suggested something less than admiration. "Perhaps you'll join us for Sunday services soon. The new church building is finally completed." "Perhaps," Katherine said noncommittally. Mrs. Porter lowered her voice. "You know, dear, if you need a more appropriate situation, I'm sure we could find you a position in town. A widow living alone with a bachelor, well, people do talk." Katherine felt her cheeks flush with indignation. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Porter, but I'm quite comfortable with my current arrangement." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Porter said, patting Katherine's arm condescendingly. "Just remember, reputations are fragile things." Wyatt, who had been loading supplies into the wagon, stepped forward. "Mrs. Porter," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Always a pleasure. If you'll excuse us, we have a long ride home." He helped Katherine into the wagon with deliberate care, his hand lingering on hers longer than necessary, a gesture not lost on Mrs. Porter, whose eyes widened with fresh gossip fodder. As they drove away, Katherine sighed heavily. I'm sorry about that. I never considered how our arrangement might appear to others. Wyatt shrugged. People will talk regardless of what we do. Harriet Porter would find scandal in a hymnal. Katherine laughed despite her embarrassment. Still, she's not entirely wrong. A woman living alone with a man. You're not alone with me, Wyatt pointed out. There are 4 ranch hands within shouting distance. That's hardly a proper chaperone situation. Wyatt glanced at her, his expression suddenly serious. Does it bother you, what people might think? Katherine considered the question. Not for myself, but I wouldn't want to damage your reputation. My reputation, Wyatt laughed. Katherine, I'm a rancher who keeps to himself and rarely comes to town except for supplies. I don't have a reputation to damage. They rode in silence for several miles, the snow-covered landscape stretching endlessly around them. Finally, Katherine gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her since retrieving her trunk. Now that I have my belongings back, I could leave for Helena as planned. Wyatt's hands tightened on the reins. Is that what you want? I don't know, Katherine admitted honestly. My cousin expects me. It was the plan all along, but nothing is as I expected when I left Kansas. She turned to look at him directly. I never expected you, Wyatt Vaughn. Wyatt kept his eyes on the trail ahead, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. What are you saying, Katherine? I'm saying I need more time to be sure of what I want. He nodded slowly. Take all the time you need. My offer stands. They arrived back at the ranch to find Lewis waiting anxiously by the corral. Riders, he reported tersely. Watching the north pasture, Tom and the boys are keeping an eye on them. Wyatt's expression darkened. The rustlers Sheriff Daniels mentioned. How many? 4, maybe 5. They disappeared into the trees when Matthew rode closer. Wyatt helped Katherine down from the wagon. Get inside and lock the door, he instructed. Lewis and I will check on the boys. Katherine obeyed reluctantly, watching from the window as Wyatt and Lewis rode away, rifles ready. She paced the cabin anxiously, jumping at every sound. Hours passed with no sign of Wyatt's return. As dusk approached, Katherine's worry turned to dread. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, she retrieved the shotgun Wyatt had shown her how to use and stepped onto the porch. The sound of hoofbeats made her raise the weapon instinctively, but she lowered it immediately when she recognized Wyatt riding toward the cabin. Behind him rode the other ranch hands, herding a small group of cattle. What happened? Katherine called as Wyatt dismounted stiffly. Caught them in the act, Wyatt explained, his face grim. They'd already cut out a dozen head and were moving them north. We persuaded them to reconsider. Were you hurt? Katherine scanned him anxiously for injuries. Just a graze, he said dismissively, though she now noticed blood seeping through his sleeve. Inside now, she ordered, taking the reins from his hand and passing them to Lewis. That needs tending. Once inside, Katherine made Wyatt remove his shirt to reveal a bullet wound on his upper arm. It wasn't deep, but it had bled considerably. You're lucky, she said, cleaning the wound with whiskey. Wyatt winced but didn't complain. Luck had nothing to do with it, he replied. Bad shot on their part. As Katherine bandaged his arm, her fingers trembled slightly. I was worried. Wyatt caught her hand in his. I'm fine, Katherine. This time, she said, meeting his eyes. What about next time, or the time after that? This life is dangerous, Wyatt. All life is dangerous in its own way, he pointed out. The question is whether it's worth the risk. Katherine finished bandaging his arm in silence, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. When she was done, she stepped back, regarding him thoughtfully. The rustlers, what happened to them? We sent them on their way with a warning. Next time, we won't be so generous. Katherine nodded, accepting his judgment. I should prepare dinner. The men will be hungry after all this excitement. Wyatt caught her arm as she turned away. Katherine, you never answered my question. Is it worth the risk? She looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability behind his usual stoicism. I don't know yet, but I'm beginning to think it might be. February brought warmer days, though the nights remained cold. Katherine continued to help around the ranch, now with more confidence in her place there. She had written to her cousin again, explaining that she would delay her journey to Helena indefinitely. One evening, as she and Wyatt sat by the fire, she finally gathered the courage to ask about his Christmas Eve proposal. "You asked me to consider staying permanently," she began. "Did you mean it?" Wyatt set aside the bridle he was mending. "Every word." "And if I stayed as more than a housekeeper, what would that mean, exactly?" Wyatt considered her question carefully. "It would mean whatever you want it to mean, Katherine. I'm not asking for promises you're not ready to make. I'm just asking for a chance." Katherine twisted her wedding ring, a habit she'd developed when nervous. "I care for you, Wyatt, more than I expected to care for anyone after James died, but I don't want to rush into something I might regret." "We have time," Wyatt assured her. "I'm not going anywhere." Their courtship progressed slowly over the following weeks. Wyatt began taking Katherine on rides around the ranch, showing her his favorite spots: a hidden meadow that bloomed with wildflowers in spring, a cliff overlooking a rushing creek, the grove of aspens where his father was buried. On Valentine's Day, Wyatt surprised Katherine with a proper dinner in town at the new hotel's restaurant. Katherine wore her blue dress and the green shawl, her hair pinned up in a style she hadn't attempted since James died. Wyatt, clean-shaven and dressed in his Sunday best, looked so handsome it made her breath catch. As they entered the restaurant, Katherine was acutely aware of the stares and whispers from the other diners. Harriet Porter was there with her husband, and the look of scandalized fascination on her face almost made Katherine laugh. "Everyone's watching us," she whispered to Wyatt. "Let them," he replied, placing his hand at the small of her back. "I'm escorting the most beautiful woman in Montana territory. They should look." The dinner was the finest Katherine had eaten in years: roast duck with orange sauce, new potatoes, fresh bread, and chocolate cake for dessert. Wyatt was attentive and charming, drawing her out about her dreams and interests in a way that made her feel truly seen. After dinner, they walked along the boardwalk, the stars brilliant overhead. When Wyatt took her hand, Katherine didn't pull away. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "It was wonderful." "You deserve wonderful things," Wyatt replied, his voice low, "and I'd like to be the man who gives them to you." They stopped walking, and Katherine turned to face him. The moonlight illuminated his features, showing the sincerity in his eyes. "Wyatt," she began, but the words caught in her throat. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Wyatt lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, a whisper of contact that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through Katherine's body. When he pulled back, Katherine found herself leaning toward him, wanting more. Startled by her own reaction, she stepped back slightly. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said immediately. "Too soon." "No," Katherine replied, surprising herself. "Not too soon, just unexpected in a good way." Wyatt's smile made her heart race. "Does that mean I can do it again?" Katherine laughed softly. "Perhaps, but not here on Main Street unless you want Mrs. Porter to faint dead away." The ride home was filled with a new awareness between them. Katherine sat closer to Wyatt than was strictly necessary, and when his arm circled her waist, she leaned into his embrace. As March approached, bringing hints of spring, Katherine made her decision. She removed her wedding ring one evening and placed it in a small box with her locket. She would always cherish James's memory, but her heart had room for new love. That same evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, Katherine turned to Wyatt. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Wyatt's expression remained carefully neutral. And I'd like to accept it. I want to stay, Wyatt, with you." The joy that bloomed on his face made Katherine's breath catch. He took her hands in his grip warm and sure. "Are you certain?" he asked, searching her eyes. "More certain than I've been about anything in a long time," she assured him. "I came here desperate and alone. You offered me shelter without asking for anything in return. Work no more, my home is yours now, you said, and now I want it to be my home too, our home." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotions words couldn't express. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Katherine Nichols," he whispered. "I think I've loved you since that first night when you insisted on helping despite barely being able to stand." "I love you too," Katherine replied, the words feeling right on her lips. "More than I thought possible." The next morning, Wyatt rode into town and returned with Reverend Collins. The ranch hands gathered in the main room of the cabin, along with Mrs. Porter, whose curiosity had overcome her disapproval, and her husband, the sheriff and his wife, and a few neighbors who had heard the news. Katherine wore her blue dress, her hair adorned with spring's first wildflowers. Wyatt stood tall and proud in his best clothes, his eyes never leaving Katherine's face as they spoke their vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Collins declared. "Mr. Vaughn, you may kiss your bride." Wyatt's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The small gathering applauded, and even Mrs. Porter dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. That night, after the guests had departed, Katherine stood in the bedroom, their bedroom now, as Wyatt built up the fire. He approached her slowly, his eyes dark with desire but also with tenderness. "Are you nervous?" he asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time." "We have all the time in the world," Wyatt assured her, taking her hands in his. "Nothing happens that you don't want." Katherine smiled up at him, love swelling in her heart. "I want you, Wyatt Vaughn. I want this life with you." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation for Katherine. Wyatt's touch was reverent, his patience infinite as he reacquainted her with the pleasures of the marriage bed. In his arms, she found not just passion but a deep sense of homecoming. Spring arrived in earnest, transforming the ranch with new growth. Katherine planted a vegetable garden beside the cabin and painted the front door blue for luck, she told Wyatt. Hope, the calf born during the blizzard, grew into a healthy heifer who still followed Katherine around the barnyard. In April, a letter arrived from Katherine's cousin, expressing delight at her marriage and promising to visit in the summer. Katherine showed the letter to Wyatt with a smile. "We'll need to prepare the guest room," she said. Wyatt nodded, though his expression was thoughtful. "Actually, I've been thinking we might want to expand the cabin a bit. Add another room or two." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "For guests, not just for guests," Wyatt replied, pulling her into his arms. "I was thinking more along the lines of a nursery." Katherine's heart skipped a beat. "A nursery, but we haven't even—" "Not yet," Wyatt agreed, his hand resting gently on her stomach. "But I have hopes if you want that too." Katherine covered his hand with hers. "I do want that, very much." As spring turned to summer, Katherine's body began to change in subtle ways. The morning sickness confirmed what she and Wyatt had hoped for: a child would join their family in winter, around the anniversary of her arrival at the ranch. "Life has a way of coming full circle," Katherine remarked one evening as they sat on the porch swing Wyatt had built, his hand resting protectively on her barely visible bump. "How so?" Wyatt asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A year ago I was alone and lost, headed for an uncertain future. Now I'm here with you, creating a new life." "You were never really lost," Wyatt said softly. "You were finding your way home." Katherine leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperate widow to beloved wife, from seeking shelter to building a home, it was more than she had ever dared hope for on that snowy night when she knocked on a stranger's door. "Work no more, my home is yours now," Wyatt had said then. She hadn't understood the true meaning of those words until now. Home wasn't just a place. It was the love they had found in each other, the family they were creating, the life they were building together. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Katherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path had been difficult, filled with loss and uncertainty, but it had led her exactly where she needed to be, in the arms of a man who loved her completely, on a ranch that had become her sanctuary, with a future full of promise stretching before them. "I love you, Wyatt Vaughn," she whispered. "And I love you, Katherine Vaughn," he replied, his voice filled with the same wonder she felt every day. Now and always. In the distance, Hope grazed peacefully in a meadow dotted with wildflowers, a living reminder of survival against the odds. Like that determined calf, Katherine and Wyatt had weathered their own storms, emerging stronger together than they ever could have been apart. As twilight settled over the ranch, Katherine closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of sage and pine, of horses and cattle, of the man beside her. This was home. This was where she belonged. And whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together with courage, with faith, and with an enduring love that had been born in the harshest of winters but would bloom for all the seasons of their lives. Summer passed in a golden haze of contentment. Katherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her body rounded and glowing with new life. Wyatt hovered protectively, insisting she rest more and delegating her heavier chores to Maria, who now came daily to help. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Wyatt added 20 head of cattle to their herd, and Katherine's vegetable garden yielded a bountiful harvest that she preserved for winter. Together, they completed the addition to the cabin, a nursery connected to their bedroom, with a window facing east to catch the morning light. Katherine's cousin Elizabeth finally visited in August, bringing news from the outside world and gifts for the baby tiny gowns and blankets she had sewn herself. She stayed for 2 weeks, marveling at the transformation in her once grieving relative. "You shine with happiness," Elizabeth observed as they sat shelling peas on the porch. "This life suits you." "It does," Katherine agreed, watching Wyatt and Lewis break a new horse in the corral. "I never imagined I could be this content again." "James would be pleased," Elizabeth said gently. "He only ever wanted your happiness." Katherine nodded, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "I know. I used to feel guilty loving Wyatt, but now I understand that love doesn't diminish what came before. It just grows to include more." September brought cooler weather and the annual cattle drive to the railroad station 40 miles away. Wyatt was reluctant to leave Katherine, now 7 months pregnant, but the sale was crucial for their finances. "I'll be fine," Katherine assured him. "Maria will stay with me and doctor. Bennett promised to check on me while you're gone. I'll be back in 10 days, Wyatt promised, kissing her goodbye. "Sooner if I can manage it." The days of his absence stretched endlessly for Katherine. She busied herself with preparations for the baby, organizing the nursery, finishing the quilt she was making from scraps of their clothing, writing in her journal about her hopes for their child. On the 8th day, a violent autumn storm blew in from the mountains. Wind rattled the windows, and rain pounded the roof with such force Katherine feared it might leak. Maria had left that morning before the storm hit, promising to return the next day if weather permitted. As evening approached, Katherine lit the lamps and built up the fire, trying to ignore the increasing discomfort in her back. When a particularly sharp pain radiated around to her abdomen, she gasped, clutching the back of a chair for support. "Too early," she whispered to herself. "It's too early." But her body had other ideas. The pains continued, growing in intensity and frequency as the night wore on. Katherine paced the cabin, breathing through each contraction as she had seen other women do. She heated water, gathered clean linens, and prayed for Wyatt's return, though she knew it was unlikely in this storm. By midnight, Katherine could no longer walk through the contractions. She made her way to the bed, arranging towels beneath her. The rain continued to beat against the roof, and lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes. "Please," she whispered, unsure whether she was addressing God, the baby, or fate itself. "Please let us both survive this." The hours passed in a blur of pain and fear. Katherine lost track of time, her world narrowing to the rhythm of contractions and the desperate need to push. Just before dawn, as a particularly powerful contraction gripped her, the cabin door burst open. Wyatt stood there, soaked to the skin, his face pale with worry. "Katherine." "The baby," she gasped, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. "It's coming." He was at her side in an instant, his strong hands gripping hers. "I'm here, tell me what to do." "Get Dr. Bennett," she managed between breaths. Wyatt shook his head grimly. "Can't, bridge is washed out. No way to town until the creek subsides." Katherine closed her eyes briefly, accepting this new challenge. "Then you'll have to help me. Women have been having babies without doctors since the beginning of time." Wyatt's expression was terrified, but he nodded resolutely. "Tell me what you need." With Wyatt's steady support, Katherine labored through the remaining hours of the night. He wiped her brow, held her hands, and encouraged her with words of love and faith when she thought she couldn't continue. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, Katherine gave a final, mighty push, and their child slipped into Wyatt's waiting hands, a perfect baby boy with a shock of dark hair and a powerful set of lungs. "Katherine," Wyatt whispered, tears streaming down his face as he placed their son on her chest. "Look what we did." Katherine gazed down at the tiny, red-faced infant now nuzzling against her skin. Despite the pain and exhaustion, her heart overflowed with a love so profound it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she murmured, counting his fingers and toes. "We've been waiting for you." Wyatt cleaned and swaddled the baby with surprising competence, then helped Katherine into a fresh nightgown. As the storm outside finally abated, a peaceful quiet settled over the cabin, broken only by the occasional whimper from their newborn son. "What shall we name him?" Wyatt asked, sitting beside Katherine on the bed, his arm around her shoulders as she nursed the baby. Katherine studied their son's face, already seeing hints of Wyatt in his strong jaw and brow. "James," she said softly. "James Wyatt Vaughn." Wyatt's expression was one of humbled gratitude. "Are you sure?" Katherine nodded. "James brought me love first. You brought me love again when I thought it was lost forever. Our son should carry both your names to honor the journey that created him." Wyatt pressed his lips to her forehead, too moved to speak. Finally, he managed, "It's perfect." "He's perfect, you're perfect." As the sun rose higher, bathing the room in golden light, Katherine marveled at how drastically her life had changed in less than a year. From the depths of grief and desperation to this moment of transcendent joy, it seemed almost miraculous. "How did you know to come back early?" she asked Wyatt, who hadn't left her side. "I didn't," he admitted. "We finished the sale faster than expected, and I had a feeling, can't explain it, that I needed to get home. Tom told me I was crazy to ride in that storm, but I couldn't stay away." "Thank God you didn't," Katherine said fervently. "I'll always come home to you," Wyatt promised, gently stroking their son's downy head. "To both of you, Doctor." Bennett arrived the following day, pronouncing both mother and baby remarkably healthy despite the early arrival and difficult circumstances. "That's one determined little fellow," he observed as he examined James. "Takes after his parents, I'd say." News of the birth spread quickly through the nearby ranches and into town. Visitors began arriving with gifts and food. Maria with a tiny embroidered gown, Tom with a handcrafted wooden rocking horse, for when he's bigger, the Porters with a silver christening cup and considerably warmer regard for Katherine now that she was a respectable married woman with a child. Autumn painted the mountains in brilliant hues of gold and crimson as Katherine regained her strength. Baby James thrived, growing plumper and more alert each day. He had Wyatt's blue eyes and Katherine's determined chin, a dangerous combination, Wyatt joked. By Christmas, the ranch was transformed once again with pine boughs and candles. Katherine insisted on a proper celebration, wanting to establish traditions for their son from his very first Christmas. The ranch hands joined them for Christmas dinner, each man awkwardly but sincerely presenting a small gift for baby James. Lewis had carved a set of wooden animals. Jake and Matthew had pooled their money for a tiny pair of leather boots for his first ride. And Tom had written a lullaby that he played on his fiddle, bringing tears to Katherine's eyes. That night, After everyone had gone and James was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Katherine and Wyatt exchanged their own gifts. Katherine had sewn Wyatt a new shirt, using fabric she had carefully saved from her monthly household allowance. Wyatt's gift to Katherine was a silver locket to replace the one she had kept her parents' portraits in. This one already contained tiny photographs of Wyatt and baby James. "For your new family," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Katherine touched it reverently. "My family," she repeated. "How wonderful that sounds." They stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall softly outside. Wyatt wrapped his arms around Katherine from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "1 year ago tonight you knocked on my door," he murmured. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Katherine leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "I was so afraid that night, afraid you'd turn me away, afraid of what would happen to me if you did." "I nearly did," Wyatt admitted. "I'd gotten used to being alone, thought it was safer that way. And now I can't imagine life without you and James. You're everything to me, Katherine." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when I offered to work for shelter?" Wyatt nodded, his eyes soft with the memory. "Work no more, my home is yours now." "I didn't understand then what you were offering. I thought it was just kindness to a stranger." "It was," Wyatt said. "But even then, something in me recognized you, not your face or your name, but your spirit, like my heart knew yours before my mind did." Katherine stood on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring all her love into the contact. "Thank you for taking in a desperate stranger, for giving me shelter, for loving me back to life. Thank you for staying," Wyatt whispered against her lips, "for making this house a home. For giving me a son and a future I never dared dream of." From the nursery came a soft whimper, then a more insistent cry. Katherine smiled. "Speaking of our son." Together they went to attend to baby James, who quieted immediately when Wyatt lifted him into his strong arms. Katherine watched them, her heart full to bursting with love for these two, her husband and her son, her family, her home. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, Katherine thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey that began with loss and desperation, but had led to love and renewal. A journey that had transformed a lonely ranch into a home filled with laughter and warmth. "I love you," she said simply, these 3 words containing all the gratitude and joy in her heart. Wyatt looked up from their son, his eyes reflecting the same profound contentment she felt. "I love you too, both of you, always." And in that moment, with the Christmas candles glowing and the fire crackling in the hearth, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not just sheltered, but truly home.